The disturbing drawings you just saw are some of the works created by Helga Weissová. Born in what was then Czechoslovakia and of Jewish origin, at just 12 years old she was able to portray one of the most atrocious crimes in human history, the Holocaust. Her works are of great importance as they remain to this day one of the few first-hand visual sources of what happened in Nazi concentration camps. For this reason, Helga's drawings are one of the few sources that depict what happened in those terrible and cruel places. Today, in this new military history video, we will tell you all about Helga Weissová's chilling work.
I found this drawing very important because it was my first drawing in Terezín. And when I smuggled it to my father, he answered me, "Draw what you see." After the response by my father, I started to describe the everyday life in Terezín.
On March 15, 1939, the German army crossed the border into Czechoslovakia. Adolf Hitler had already annexed a region of the country the previous year, but not satisfied with this, he extended his conquest to the rest of the country. On both occasions, he met no resistance, and the nation became part of the Third Reich. Much of the Czechoslovak population sympathized with Nazi ideology and welcomed foreign troops with open arms. But this sentiment was not shared by everyone. The country had a high percentage of Jewish citizens who had already heard rumors of what the Germans were capable of. For them, the entry of the Germans was the beginning of the most brutal nightmare they could imagine.
I was not from a very rich family, but I had good parents. We were a good family, and I had a very lucky childhood. But after occupation, everything has been changed, and our life became still more and more difficult.
With the approval of a large portion of the Aryan population, the Nazis began their campaign of terror against the Jewish people. Everyone was required to wear the Star of David on their clothing to be easily identified. If they owned a shop, they were required to announce their affiliation with the community. If they didn't, their business risked being destroyed by German agents. Those who were employed were fired, and even children like Helga were denied access to schools. For years, the Jews of Czechoslovakia lived in these conditions, persecuted and hated. Many, now jobless, had to find other ways to earn a living, performing menial jobs, or surviving on smuggling in the black market. But while these people's lives had become a nightmare, it was nothing compared to what they were about to face. By the end of 1941, World War II was in full swing. Germany controlled much of Europe and seemed completely invincible. It was at this point that Hitler decided to implement his plan of mass extermination, known as the Final Solution. The Jewish population within the territories conquered by the Reich began to be sent to ghettos established by the Nazis, making them easily controllable. Helga and her family were unable to escape the Germans. Along with hundreds of others, they were forced to leave their homes and board trains bound for the town of Terezín in northern Czech Republic. Those who refused to board or asked too many questions were executed on the spot. This was how Helga came face to face with true horror for the first time. The Germans made it clear to their prisoners that any type of search was strictly prohibited, and the consequences for defying this order were fatal. However, despite being only 12 years old, Helga decided to disobey her jailers and draw the terrible scenes she witnessed. The Nazis forced all Jews to walk the 3 kilometers from the train station to Terezín, regardless of their age or health. It was December then, and snow fell frequently. Those who couldn't make the journey were abandoned or simply shot. Helga and her family managed to reach the village, but terrible news awaited them there. The Germans had decided to separate the men from the women, In this way, families were broken up, regardless of whether the children were left alone. Helga had to say goodbye to her father and remain with her mother. However, through a system of smuggling, the prisoners were able to continue sending messages to each other. Despite the risk they faced if the Nazis caught them in the act, many of them kept this means of communication with their families alive. It was during these occasions that Helga sent her drawings to her father, who told her to depict everything she saw. The conditions in the Terezín ghetto were terrible. The facilities had been built to house a maximum of 7,000 people, but during the war they housed approximately 60,000. Helga and her mother were forced to share the room where they lived with 20 other women. Without adequate sanitary facilities, and with the little food the Germans deigned to offer, life in the ghetto was very harsh. It wasn't long before the weakest could no longer resist and died of starvation or one of the many diseases that circulated there. Despite this, Helga remained confident that the war would soon end and that everything would return to normal. However, with each passing day, the cruelty of the Nazis became more evident. On one occasion, 9 children were caught while trying to deliver letters to their mothers. The German guards, who belonged to the SS, the cruelest organization within the Reich, decided to make an example of them. In one of the ghetto courtyards, in full view of everyone, they marched them carrying shovels on their shoulders. Soon after, the ghetto inhabitants learned that it was so they could dig their own graves. The cruelties against the Jewish population continued for years. Even though Terezín's capacity was already vastly exceeded, the Germans continued to bring in more people, replacing those who died daily. By 1944, rumors of the atrocities carried out by the Nazis in the ghettos and concentration camps reached the ears of the entire world. For this reason, the International Red Cross scheduled a visit to Terezín to record what was happening. But Hitler, rather than worrying, decided to take advantage of this situation. He ordered the ghetto to be thoroughly cleaned and decorated to demonstrate that the Jews were being treated well. The prisoners were required to praise the Nazis' behavior or risk mortal punishment.
At the time we very much hoped when International Red Cross would come and they would see the situation, it would be help for us and something would be changed to better. But inspection came and they watched and looked only on the places which were shown them, and the inspection itself lasted only a half day, and in the evening they described a certificate, they found everything okay. So it was a great propaganda and they believed it.
The Führer's trick worked. However, with the Allies getting closer, it was only a matter of time before evidence of their crimes came to light. Because of this, the Nazi leaders decided to accelerate their extermination process and liquidate the ghettos. All the Jews who had been imprisoned there for years were put back on the trains, which now took them to an even worse fate: the concentration camps. In October 1944, it was Terezín's turn. The men were transported first. This was the last time Helga saw her father. They were promised that their female relatives would remain in the ghetto, but this was just another lie from the Nazis. A few days later, Helga and her mother were placed on another train. Their destination was none other than one of the most inhumane camps of World War II, Auschwitz-Birkenau.
We had no idea that something like that existed. We didn't know very well. It was a step in hell. If hell exists, it perhaps looks like Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, originally intended as a forced labor camp, had become a killing machine. The gas chambers operated constantly, killing an average of 10,000 people per day. As soon as they got off the train, Helga and her mother had to face the terrible selection process. The Germans separated the new arrivals into two lines. Some, those who appeared healthy, were directed to the barracks, and others, the weakest, the elderly, and children, were taken directly to their death in the chambers. Helga, who was 15 at the time, only survived by convincing the Nazi in charge of the selection that she was over 18. At the same time, she claimed that her mother, who was very weak from so many years of hardship, was younger than she actually was. In this way, they managed to escape the chambers. However, their agony was just beginning. Life at Auschwitz was terribly harsh and cruel. The life expectancy of their captives was only a few weeks. The guards frequently executed prisoners for no reason. Furthermore, the food and hygiene conditions were far worse than they had been in the Terezín ghetto. They barely had enough food to survive.
There was not enough food, and for the food we received, it was not possible to live. The situation was terrible. It was hopeless, but we never wanted to leave hope. When somebody left hope, he was lost.
Although the prisoners didn't know it, the German enemies were getting closer to the heart of the Reich. To prevent evidence of their crimes from falling into Soviet hands, the Nazis began moving the prisoners to other concentration centers closer to Berlin. After 10 days in Auschwitz, Helga and her mother were transported to the Freiburg camp in Germany. The story here was similar. Once again, Helga had to find a way to survive and care for her mother, who was growing increasingly weak. Throughout this time, she continued to draw, portraying the harsh reality of Jewish prisoners, taking care not to be discovered by the guards. Even at her young age, she knew how important they would be once the nightmare was over. In early 1945, as the Allies approached again, Freiburg was evacuated. This time, the Germans didn't even bother putting the prisoners on trains or trucks, but forced them to walk the entire distance. More than 300 kilometers separated them from Mauthausen, their new destination. This death march lasted 16 days. During this time, Helga, her mother, and thousands of others had to travel this enormous distance, while the German guards tortured them constantly. Anyone unable to continue was shot. The corpses sank beneath the snow. Helga, along with her mother, was one of the lucky ones who survived the journey to Mauthausen. There, Germany's critical situation during the war caused the meager food rations to dwindle even further. By April 1945, the guards, knowing that the Reich's days were numbered, began to worry more about their own survival, leaving the prisoners to their fate. After Hitler took his own life, the Nazis evacuated the camp entirely. Unlike other concentration camps, they made no attempt to liquidate the remaining captives. Helga's hell ended on May 5, 1945, after 7 months when American soldiers arrived to free the inmates.
For us, it was a little too late. We were glad everything was over, of course, but the first thoughts were, so we survived, but what about my father? Did he also survive?
Her mother, thanks in part to Helga's efforts, also managed to survive the nightmare of the Holocaust. But liberation had a bitter taste. They never saw their father again. He was one of the 7 million Jews murdered by the Nazis during the war. Helga's paintings depicting the most raw experiences of these people are today an invaluable record of history. Thanks to them, we can better understand what they endured during the terrible years of the Holocaust.
And keep it in memory what happened, and do something that it wouldn't happen anymore. That's what we learn, to be tolerant to each other, to understand to each other, not to be selfish, to be healthy, to have family, to have hope and freedom.
We've reached the end of the video and we want to ask you, do you know of any other visual records that show what life was like for the victims of Germany? Leave your answer in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.